Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our wonderful Live Like Yogananda series based on Chapter 17 of Swami Kriyananda's biography of Yogananda. If you haven't read this book, it's really a beautiful read. So let's pray together and then we'll begin. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. We open our hearts to your transforming presence. Help us to feel your constant, loving guidance within us. Making our way through this world is confusing at best, terrifying, exhilarating, joyous, nightmarish. It just varies like waves on the sea. Our only salvation, our only true hope of happiness, steadfast concentration on your spirit within us. Give us the strength and the clarity and the freedom to be able always to choose your will. Om. Peace. Amen. We're up to number 4 of 32, Salient Characteristics of Master. Oh no, I have to start first. Of course, I've been getting fly jokes and jokes about personalities, and my sister Beth reminded me of one of my father's jokes. So of course, in that spirit, I have to tell it, which happened to be about a fly. And a man is in a restaurant, and the waiter brings a bowl of soup, and the diner looks at it. He says, "Waiter, there's a fly in this soup." And the waiter leans over. He says, "It's just one. How much can he eat?" Okay, now we can go on. But I had to, in tribute to my wonderful father, whose hard work has helped me also to be able to work well, and I really appreciate it. So I think the greatest tribute my father would like would be that I would tell one of his jokes. Perhaps not the greatest, but he would enjoy it. So, number 4, completely different topic. For those of you who don't have any idea what I'm talking about, yesterday was about Master's, quote, impish sense of humor, and Swami regaled us with several of Master's favorite jokes. So that's why my email has been a little lively. Okay. And this is number 4. Master understood others from within themselves and not as other people do from the outside. I'm going to say that again. Master understood others from within themselves and not as other people understand each other, which is from the outside. So, and then he gives an example. There was a young disciple, Abby George, whose talk was rather salty. I love the choice of language. Whose talk was rather salty, and who didn't know the usual respect for his guru and didn't show the usual respect for his guru. In fact, he was inwardly extremely respectful, but such had been his upbringing. He would actually sit in a chair with one leg over the arm as he talked with the Master. But Master saw behind the facade. After some particularly unusual display of what in other disciples would have been blatant disrespect, Master embraced Abby with a loving laugh. So there's just a lot. There's a lot in there. Let me just think about it. Let's start with just, mostly we understand each other from the outside. You see what a person looks like, you see how they present themselves, you see what their manners are like, you see whether they're educated or not, what kind of conversation they have, whether they're articulate, and their personality gradually reveals itself, and you sort of begin to feel that you know someone. Now, of course, not everyone is completely superficial, and even the ability to go deep in our understanding of someone tends to come from the objective evidence that's offered. We go into the reality of a master's consciousness, and the first characteristic that we talked about of master was that he had no ego. That's just there, and even when he was praised for his humility by one of his disciples, Master said, "How can there be humility when there is no sense of self?" And that is the key. That transcendence of ego is the key to understanding how Master could be as he was with us. Is with us is actually the right word. When we are identified with ourselves, with our ego personality and our limited personality, that becomes the point of reference in which we see everything in the world. And we have a tendency, I'm not speaking so much we as meaning I personally, but just human beings. Human beings have a tendency to sort of see the world through the filter of what we're used to, and just sort of evaluating the world in terms of what our own experience is, because that's simply what we know. And this is where people can become extremely superficial in the way they judge each other according to their manners. Do we understand, how proper society is carried out? I have a friend who happened, she doesn't make a point of it, but she was raised in a very high echelon of society, in a family that her family name is known throughout the world. That's the strata that she was raised in. She's very humble. She's repudiated any of the pretense that is related to that. But when I traveled with her, I happened to travel with her, with a group, with Swamiji. It was really interesting to me because she had been extremely well brought up, and the only thing I can think of is the best of aristocracy, which was she just had a manner about her in the way she related to waiters in restaurants and people in stores, all of which was positive, I want to say, very positive. But there was an aristocratic grace to her, which had never crossed my mind. I just never thought of behaving in that manner. It just wasn't my way. I actually learned a lot from her because it was worth emulating. But it was entirely like the social class. This is how you behave if this is who you are. Swami described his own mother as aristocratic in the best sense of it, which is just very strong within herself, very dignified, but at the same time always extremely aware and very gracious of what all those around her needed from her. And in both cases, it was also a mark of spirituality, but it was an acquired skill from the outside. Now, because Master did not identify with any limited ego, he identified with the whole of creation. He knew himself to be the whole of creation. Now, there are many fundamental spiritual truths that are spoken repeatedly. This has been my experience, at least. And then I'll have heard it for decades now. And then one day I'll actually understand more than I did exactly what that means. Swamiji has often talked about how everything is a manifestation of Satchidananda. All of us are an expression of one reality. I've striven mightily all my life, my spiritual life, which is basically all my life, to cut the ties of egoic identification. But they linger, to put it mildly, and the sort of instinctive fallback to that separate identity is a vritti that is, we're working to dissolve. It doesn't bind me like it used to, but it still binds me. But if we start with the fundamental divine truth, and this is how these very complicated spiritual ideas all work together. We used to laugh with Swamiji because when he would want to express the most concrete in this world spiritual principle, he would often start with what we called the galactic gases. And just to talk about, how best to help your child learn manners at the table or something like that, we would start with the galactic gases, these stars roaming around, and they happen to attract each other in the gravitational field, and then slowly it coalesces, and then very, very gradually we get down to your child who's constantly spilling his milk, and how do I deal with him? But in Swamiji's mind, he saw it as a consistent whole. And the decision that you make about spilling the milk really cannot be clearly expressed unless we understand where the impulse to spill the milk originated from. 2 nights ago, I was giving a class based on Swami's book of letters, and there was a 2-page letter that was written in 1998 that was written at the end of a long saga of the community. 20 minutes later, I realized I hadn't even started reading the letter. I didn't quite go all the way back to the galactic gases, or we would still be sitting there. But everything was connected, and I didn't feel that you could understand these 3 paragraphs unless you had the whole context. I know not everyone agrees with me. Get to the point is a phrase that I've heard really often in my life. I'm getting there as fast as I can. But I realized that's how Swami felt, because this didn't make any sense unless you really felt that whole flow. So when we start talking about how Master could understand us from within, there's 2 aspects to it, what I'm trying to get across, because this is not just about how great he was. This is how he manifested the perfect humanity, which is also our destiny and our goal. So we need to understand how he got there. And how he got there is that he was completely withdrawn from his separateness, and he was living in the source of everything. And when you're living in the source, see, what confuses us is there's a center point of reality, which is the unique divine expression that God has given us. And then we're out here in the expression. And when you're at the periphery, you really don't necessarily understand what the motivation is. And if you're looking even from your periphery to the periphery of someone else, all you see is the result, and you don't really understand what the cause is. Now, within ourselves, people are more or less conscious of their own motivations, just depending on how much focus they have put into self-understanding and how honest we are able to be about who we actually are and what we actually feel. This, again, is a fundamental part of sadhana, is to come into truth and to accept that reality. Some truths are very painful. Some experiences are very traumatic, and we just don't want to know about them. So we deliberately move out from the center and live on the periphery. Well, the Master just comes back. He comes back to the origin point, because that's where he always lives. And from that origin point, everybody's consciousness is equally accessible to him. This is the same picture that I've drawn for time. If you think of a bicycle wheel with all the spokes emanating out from the hub at the center, eternity is at the center and the wheel is time, but let's use a different image, that we live on the periphery of who we are, but all of us, the energy and the reality of our being it emanates from this same hub. And we are also, our consciousness is also at this hub, but we are trapped in one spoke leading to one reality. But and as the spokes emanate from the hub, they separate from each other. So if you're on the rim of the wheel, looking from spoke to spoke, there's a distance between you. But the closer you get to the center, the closer those spokes become until they literally join. So when Master lives at the hub of eternity, of the origin, of whatever the many things you would call it, he's as close to the rim of the wheel at any point. Everyone is equally accessible to him. He's not, more like, closer to, more attuned to, more similar. None of that. He stands at the unified origin point, and he can reach out with his consciousness to the rim of the wheel in any direction. So any individual who crosses his path, whereas we might see gender and age and culture and training and aristocracy or peasantness or whatever it is that we're going to see, Master would just feel the pulsing unity of the divine. And then he could also understand intuitively all of this, the entire karmic trajectory that made a person that way. So we have this Abby George, as an individual who was not aristocratic in his manners, who was not raised apparently in a very what society would call a refined home with refined manners, and even just the obvious natural awe that people held Master in, and therefore caused them to respond in certain ways, just wasn't part of his way. But Master didn't see that far off final manifestation of all these twists and turns of karma. He felt Abby George just the way he felt himself, which is just a pulsing expression of Satchidananda. And so from that origin point, if we think about it, and this came also with me in a situation I was in where people were profoundly misunderstanding something I intended. And I had been clumsy in my expression of it. But the misunderstanding was still massive. Swami reassured me by saying, he said, God reads the heart. And again, these are magnificent phrases to remember. What that means is God knows, and thinking of the heart as the origin point. When Master talks about the center of the Imperium was a point of intuitive perception in my own heart. I mean, we begin with the feeling nature, our consciousness. God reads the heart. He knows who we really are. That's what that means. And once you know who someone really is, not what they appear to be, then everything about the way you relate to them is just completely different. And sometimes the facade that they put on, which can be either attractive or offensive to others, depending on many factors, the Master simply doesn't see it. He sees the origin point. He feels that, who am I really trying to be? What do I really long for? What do I aspire to become? And so Master experienced people as their vibration of consciousness, which is another way to put it. So when he was with Abby George, he felt his fundamental vibration of consciousness was apparently deep devotion and deep regard and love for God and for Guru, which are magnificent. That's the true aristocracy. Manners is just something that you can put on. Speaking of my friend, her aristocratic nature, speaking of Swami's mother, it was genuinely who they were. It was interesting to me to see it manifested in that way. But sometimes who we are, because of where we're born or what we do or what karma we're working out, which is the case of this disciple, Abby, that he was not refined, but in the way that really mattered, he was deeply refined. And so Master he could just brush off without the slightest consideration because Master was also impersonal in his respect. And so he could impersonally respect him for who he really was. And the fact that he treated Master and behaved in a way that was shocking to the other disciples, what difference did that make? Now, what we have to understand is, well, this is another way of describing unconditional love. There's two aspects of this that are important for us to keep in mind. One of them is that is how we are loved by God now. This is how Swami related to us. This is how Master relates to us. When Swami spoke of Master saying to him, "I know every single thought that you think," Master said that to Swami. And I said, "Sir, is that still true? I mean, that Master's passed out of this world, is he still aware of us on that level?" And it was interesting. Swami looked surprised that I would ask. And his response was, "Of course." It's like, where would he go? And why would he change? And what would the discipleship bond be if it weren't omnipresent and ever living? Now, many people struggle with sort of feeling they have to, quote, try to please God, or feel that there's things that they could do that could exile them from the Guru's love, or that they're not worthy, or they have to present a certain perfection before the divine. That's just entirely and 100% wrong, which is why we often talk about Heavenly Father, Divine Mother. Now, just think about a little child. I mean, think about how outrageous little children are sometimes. You know, they're filthy and they're uncivilized, and such behavior in adults you wouldn't be able to function in the world. But they just present themselves. They can be sticky and muddy and carrying frogs and insects, and come to Mother who's all dressed up to go to a party, and they'll just walk up and put their arms around her with just the full expectation that whatever I'm bringing to you, you're going to accept. And will understand. I'm not walking up to you to spoil your dress. I'm walking up to you because I love you. Swami tells a story in the path that's interesting. His parents were very good with him, but there was a misunderstanding in this one. He said they had done some remodeling in the house they were living in, Swami writes, and the bathroom had just been painted. And Swami loved color and beauty. And the newly painted room was just so beautiful to him that he wanted to contribute. So I think he picked up a nail or something like that and scratched a big star into the paint, because he thought he was contributing to make it better. And what his father saw, and he became impatient with him, was that he was malicious mischief, and he spanked him. And Swami felt that was just an extraordinarily unfair thing to have done. And Swami said that his father, he doesn't remember that his father ever spanked him again, because it really had been a mistake, and his father understood that. But Swami's intention was to make it more beautiful. It looked like he was making it less beautiful. Now, Swami told that story in that book, and I've thought about it a lot of times, because it was such an interesting story to include. But isn't that our experience of life? That we so often have an intention to create something beautiful, and it's interpreted in the opposite way, or in a twisted way, or just not accepted with the importance that we ourselves place on it. But with the Guru, never. Because he understands us from the inside. So there is no possibility of misunderstanding. Now, meditate on what that means, on the security that gives you. There's no possibility of misunderstanding. And now, from the other side of what we're talking about, that we're not merely here to admire, although we are here to be disciples, but we are also here to emulate. Imagine being able to give that kind of friendship to others. And of course, it's completely within our ability to do so. For us, it will require more conscious will and more conscious discipline. You know, am I merely projecting upon you the logic that works for me, or am I really settling deeply enough into my own self to feel your reality? I have a technique, I don't know who first taught it to me, but I found it very helpful. When I'm with someone and I can't quite figure out what they want from me, I often pray not only for them, but to them. And essentially what I pray to is I pray to their superconscious. And I say, your soul knows what would be helpful to you. I don't know. This is a silent prayer sometimes. I don't know what would be helpful to you. Please inspire me. Tell me what it is that I can do that would help you. In other words, I consciously try to connect from the hub of the wheel, from the superconscious reality of myself to their superconscious reality. And then from the hub of the wheel, we may be able to work together. I remember I had a relationship with a person that was just, we didn't understand each other. And it was decades ago, and I didn't have that much experience. But somehow we got off on the wrong foot and never got back onto the right one, or maybe there wasn't a right one. But the person would sometimes come to me and say, you know, I'm having difficulty in this situation. I'm being asked to do these certain things, but when I do them, it makes me feel like this, and then this bad thing happens, and there would be some description of difficulties they were having based on their characteristics. And then my way of counseling still is, but I think I'm better at it now, is that I sometimes can hear the thread of what someone is saying, and they themselves might not have seen the thread. So I will often take what they have told me and try to clarify it. Oh, so then they can understand. This is just the outsider's perspective. That's what the third party can do. And so I would say, well, inasmuch as you feel this way, and then the person would say, how dare you describe me like that? And then I would be in the very difficult position of having to try to say, that's not my description, that's your description, but we would already be down the rabbit hole and it would be done. And it would always be they would describe some weakness they were having, and then I would say, well, inasmuch as this is a weak area for you, let's do so-and-so. And much later, years later, I was talking to someone, and this had been a conundrum for me. I could never understand what the catastrophe of those interactions was. I never straightened it out, and I never understood it. Talking to a friend, and I sort of described this, and my friend says to me, she didn't want you to confirm those weaknesses, she wanted you to repudiate them. They wanted you to say, oh no, you're not like that, you know. And I just looked at my friend and I said, how did you know that? She said, I don't know, I could just feel it by what you said. I was impressed with my friend, and I was impressed by the fact that I couldn't feel it. I mean, it taught me enormously a very different way to relate to people. Not, what are you saying to me, but who are you? Who are you, and why would you say that? Just, who are you? Not what are you presenting, but who are you? Who are you deep in yourself? This is what Master's instruction to us is here. Master, unlike most people, I'll just read it off. Master understood others from within themselves, and not as other people do from the outside. So let us try to do that. Let us try to unite with the spiritual heart of everyone around us. Pray to their soul and their superconscious self, and be guided then to help them walk the path toward divinity that is the true path for them. God bless you.